This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris. Welcome to the Photography Guild. This month, we're going to be talking about shutter speed. But before we get into that, I just wanted to give a special thank you to those photographers who shared their macro photographs that they took from our last lesson and put them up on our Flickr group so that everyone could enjoy them. They were so beautiful and so inspiring. So I just wanted to personally thank all of you who did that. Now, if you haven't seen those photographs, please go to our website and click on the Flickr feed, and you can see what other people are shooting for these different lessons. So anyway, let's get started. We're going to be talking about shutter speed today. So here is our exposure triangle that we've been working with. And in previous episodes, we talked about aperture and how that controls our depth of field when we're taking a photograph. And we've also talked about ISO, which has to do with the noise that we see in our photographs. It's determined by how much available light we've got. And then today we're going to hit on shutter speed. And shutter speed is really important when you are photographing things that are moving. And the shutter speed controls the motion blur that we see in our photographs. Okay, so what is shutter speed? Well, in film photography, it was the length of time that the film was exposed to the scene that we were photographing. And in digital photography, it's not much different, except for the shutter speed is the length of time that our image sensor is seeing the scene that we're attempting to capture. So it's the amount of time that our shutter is open. Shutter speed is measured in seconds or fractions of seconds, and the bigger the denominator, the bottom number of the fraction, the faster the speed. So for example, 1/1000th of a second is way faster than 1/30th of a second. Now, to give you an example, this photograph here is of a little fountain that I took at the Keukenhof Gardens in Holland on my last trip. And this water was moving, obviously, so I shot this at a shutter speed of 1/40th of a second. Now, this is some of the questions that we want to ask ourselves when we're dealing with shutter speed and motion in our photography. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is anything moving in this scene? And then we need to ask ourselves, do I want to freeze the movement or do I want the motion to blur? Well, let me give you an example. These were these really cool metal kind of wind sculptures that I photographed at a winery up in the Sonoma Valley for my Humble Bottle podcast. And these were whipping around, and but I didn't want them to blur. I loved the architecture-ness of these, so I shot them very fast at a shutter speed of 1/800th of a second, so it froze my image. So the big question is, do we freeze the action or do we blur the action? Well, this is just an example of a little fountain down at our neighborhood park. And I set myself up down there and I stayed in the same spot in the park. All I did was change my shutter speed. So for example, on the shot on the left, I thought, okay, let's freeze the water so it looks like the drops are in midair. So I went with a very fast shutter speed, 1/500th of a second. Now in the second shot, I went for more of that soft, silky effect Now I did need to use a tripod because I was using a slower shutter speed of 1/115th of a second, and that means my shutter was open for a really long time. Now I also went ahead and adjusted my ISO down because I was in bright light, but you can see, and it's fun to practice, that when you're working with one image, stay in the same spot and just try changing your shutter speeds just to see the different kind of looks and effects that you can get. So here are a couple of things to consider. Now, if you're dealing with motion, or in the case of this photograph, a very low light situation, don't just think about shutter speed. One of the things you can also consider is your aperture. Now here's the deal. If you decide you want to control your shutter speed and your aperture, then you are going fully manual on that shot, which is something that you can always do. Now for me, going fully manual is too many variables, and it's just a little too much. So what I tend to do is, if I'm going to be playing with shutter speed, I put my camera on the TV setting, or the time value setting, and then I can control my shutter speed. The camera will handle the aperture for me automatically, but I do tend to play around with my ISO a little bit, and of course we know there's not as many variables with that, and I find that I have some pretty good luck. Now the other thing too is, if you decide you want to be going with shots that have a very slow shutter speed, where the camera iris is staying open for a really long time, you are going to need to use a tripod. There's no way around it, and the reason is the camera is staying, vulnerable and open for so long that if there is any shake in the camera, your whole shot is ruined. Now I just had to share with you, this is my new favorite photograph that I've taken. This is of the Munsterkerk, which is the church that's in the center of my family's hometown in Holland, and I just thought this was so cool, but my light was obviously fading, but I thought, oh, maybe I can get some really interesting contrast with this photograph. So I put my camera on a tripod, I put my shutter speed to 1/3 of a second, which is a long time, it's open for a long time, and I shot it at an ISO of 800. Now this is just a little tip that I picked up recently that has really worked out well for me. When I know I'm going to be taking a photograph using a slow shutter speed, I don't want to even touch my camera once I get it set up. So one of the things I picked up is like a $10 or $12 remote for my camera, so that I can set the shot up, and then I can just have a remote and click it, and I don't even touch the camera, and then that way the shutter can be as open as long as I've asked it to be, but I get no shake at all. So these are just a couple of other things to consider when you're going to be playing with shutter speed. So let me see if I can give you sort of a foundation of how shutter speed relates to each other. So for example, on a lot of our cameras, a slow shutter speed would be considered 1 second, a half a second, a fourth of a second, and an eighth of a second. That means the shutter is going to be open for that amount of time, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when it's a shutter, it is a lot of time. And for that slow shutter speed, you're going to get either the blurred motion, like that silky effect on water, or in the case of my last photograph, I was trying to keep the shutter open to capture as much available light as possible. In either case, you have to have a tripod. There's no way around it, but you get some spectacular shots that way. Now, the mid-range of shutter speeds, that's like the 1/15th to 1/250th of a second. That's what we are normally shooting in, so that's like just your regular handheld, and if you were on an auto function, that's mainly what you would be shooting at, and you don't have to worry about the shake so much of the camera. Then if you're getting down to where you want to freeze motion, you want the water droplets to freeze in air. Someone is jumping and you want to freeze that shot. What you're talking about is the faster shutter speeds, 1/500th, 1/1000th, and 1/2000th of a second. Those are very fast. And one suggestion you might think of is if your camera has a power drive enabling device on it, go ahead and switch it on to power drive. That way when you press the shutter release button, it just is clicking, click, 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 and you can catch all kinds of interesting motion shots that way. So being able to control our shutter speed allows us to photograph all kinds of really interesting things. So if you were going to shoot waterfalls or fountains, if you were going for a blur effect, you'd want to set your shutter to about 1/15th of a second. Whereas if you wanted to go really fast, get that frozen in air type look, go with 1/500th of a second. Now, if you were capturing children playing or some sort of sport thing, you were going to want to crank up the speed to 1/500th up to maybe 1/1000th of a second and probably put your power drive on. And then if you were really doing some cool stuff like hummingbirds, those little guys move really fast. You'd have to crank it up to maybe 1/2000th of a second on your camera. Now, for those of you that have a point and shoot camera, on some cameras they actually do have some settings that you might be able to work with. I have a little Polaroid camera that is fully automatic, and it has a splash water or a flow water setting. So the splash water would be like the super fast shutter speed, and the flow water would be more of that kind of silky look. Now, this was actually a photograph I took a long time ago, and this was with my little automatic, and it shot it at a shutter speed of 1/1600th of a second. So it is possible if you've got a point and shoot camera that has some of those variables for you. Now, for those of us with the SLR cameras, I'm going to suggest, if you're just playing with shutter speed for the first time, that you go onto the TV setting, the time value setting, and play with that, and then also play with your ISO a little bit. Now, this was kind of interesting. This was when I was in Holland. This windmill was turning, but I wanted it to look like it wasn't. So I shot it, again, I was outside, so I shot it at an ISO of 100. My shutter speed was 1/1000th of a second. I let the aperture do its thing automatically. So when you're first starting to play with shutter speed, really consider just switching over to the TV setting until you kind of get the hang of things. So our assignment for this month is on using our shutter speed functions. And so let's photograph something in motion. Go down to a park, anywhere where there's a water feature, or if there's things moving in air or kids playing, something like that. Let's see what kind of things we can get that have some motion in them. And then remember, make your choices. Do I want it to blur? Do I want it to be frozen? I think you'll find you can get some really cool shots even when you're shooting just the same subject. And as always, please share your photographs. They're so wonderful. If you come to our photography guild here in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can bring them to our next meeting. Or if you don't live nearby, and please post them on the Flickr site. There is an explanation on how to do that on our website, but choose the way that works best for you. But please do share your photographs. That's what they're there for. Well, I hope you'll join me next month. We're going to be talking about travel photography, and I'm really excited about this topic, although it seems like I'm excited about every topic, which I am. But this next one, I had the good fortune of going to a conference in April where 2 National Geographic photographers were speaking. I got to spend the whole day with them, and they just passed on the most amazing information. And one of the things they talked about was when they get an assignment and go into a city, how they create a photo essay on that city. So I wanted to share that with you, and we'll be doing that next time on the Photography Guild. We'll see you then. For more information on this episode, go to our website and visit the Photography Guild show notes. Also, if you have any questions or ideas, send us an email. Thanks for watching.